He has been listed by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Sir Richard Branson. Your peers, other business leaders, recognized you as the most inspirational business leader for the last 50 years, but you don't consider yourself a businessman.
Yeah, I think the word businessman is slightly misleading.
Now, Sir Alan, The Apprentice has put business on primetime television. Were you surprised by the success of The Apprentice?
Yes and no, because I saw it in America, first of all.
Well, Sven, after a lot of waiting, we saw your final squad on Monday.
You were surprised?
I was surprised. We're certainly one of the positions. I think a lot of people were surprised, but I understand in a radio poll, I think 80% of the British public supported you in your choice. But was it a difficult decisions to make?
Yes, of course, it's very difficult decisions to make when you have to phone up 10 people saying you are not in the squad.
Now, you mentioned Iraq hanging over the second term, and you mentioned the divisive nature of Iraq. With the benefit of hindsight, would you have approached the whole Iraq situation differently? Yeah, but how do you establish the mental strength of someone like Theo Walcott, someone like Aaron Lennon, who are new to the squad?
Yeah, if we talk about Walcott, of course, I've never seen him play, only on TV and videos. And
the Virgin brand is now your biggest asset. What does the Virgin brand stand for?
Yeah, so your brand is all you've got, and your own reputation is all you've got, and you have to protect these zealously.
Now, winning the Olympics for Great Britain versus winning at the Olympics, how does that compare?
It's a good question, and for me, I think that being a part of a team that brought the Games back to the UK for the first time in 64 years was more important than the individual achievements earlier in my career.
Well, Clive, I think the first subject I'd like you to sort of contribute on is Theo Walcott, because you actually have seen him play, haven't you?
He's rubbish.
Did that, in a sense, mark your period of Director General with a big change of regime from your predecessor, John Birt?
It's the stories they tell about you that matter, because either they're positive or they're negative.
A story was told about you and your driver. Do you want to tell that story?
I just got there. I just got there, and he didn't become my driver. He was my driver for a couple of weeks, but I mean, he was a bloke whose holiday had just fallen apart. He wanted to go to Devon, and I said, hey, I've got a flat in Devon, you can just go and use that.
And choosing a product, do you choose the product on instinct or basis of deliberate market research?
Well, as I explained once to Mr. Narita of Sony, the late Mr. Narita of Sony, who was one of my fans, there are no statistics for something that doesn't exist.
Now, you were quoted as saying once that you learn a lot about yourself 20 minutes before an Olympic final. What were you feeling, what were you thinking 20 minutes before making that very powerful presentation in Singapore?
Well, you do learn a lot about yourself 20 minutes before an Olympic final, and if you want to sort of set the scene, there are 8 or 9 people who really have been working for 4 years for this moment. I think people think that when you warm up for a race in the Olympic Games, you just warm up and then go straight into the stadium. It's a 3-hour process. And the last 40 minutes before the race, you're literally sitting in a room, in a call-up room, waiting to go through, the bowels of the stadium into the arena. And it's very interesting. You can watch the people who it gets to.
Whilst I was talking about setting goals, it would be wrong to say that you had any sort of career plan at all. Or am I being unfair?
Well, I left school to be a trainee manager at Marks and Spencer.
Which lasted, about 8 months or so?
No, it didn't last that long. They fired me by Christmas.
In Australia, what did you do in Australia? Because it was a long tournament, you travelled a lot. What did you do to keep everyone together?
I think you find
if you've got the right players, I mean, these are incredibly professional athletes. They know how to fill their time in. I think at times you can sometimes give them too much, and they feel too pressurised. I mean, you're in a big pressure situation. When you're not training or not involved with the team, you need to give them the space. The biggest thing is having a group of players who you totally trust.
Sven announced his squad on Monday. If you could have picked one of those players for Monday to have in the 66 side, which player would that have been?
Well, it's very difficult. I'd go for either the midfield players.
You talked earlier about or distinguished between the SME and the corporate, and you talked about the SME having the flame of innovation.
Yeah.
Is it inevitable that as an SME grows, it takes on the characteristics of the corporate?
No, it's not. I tell you, but it's interesting what corporates are doing. Some of your colleagues who've left school, I go back again to my childhood. My dad was panicked about me because he only knew a world where you begged for a job and you clung on to it.
And Patrick, I think you used the term that communication is the glue that makes things work. Could you expand on that?
I think it's very important that when you try to communicate with people, that you communicate with people that are able to get back at you. I mean, I had to brief about 5,000, or I wanted to brief about 5,000 of my soldiers before we went into the attack into Iraq. And I split them down into groups of 100, so you can see how many briefings I gave. But what it meant was, in a group of 100, you could eyeball them all, which is very important. But more importantly still, they could come back at you. They didn't feel there were too many people they didn't want to ask a question. They were amongst their mates, and they could ask you questions.
Italia 90, Paris 98, Euro 96, Euro 2004, we all went out on penalties. Clive mentioned the importance of practicing penalties. What are you doing to prepare for the eventuality in Germany?
Yep, we practice, of course we practice. The problem is that in a penalty shootout, after 5, 6, 7 penalties, you will have a guy which normally don't take penalties in his club. The 3, 4, 5, they normally take them, so that's not a problem. The problem is when we're coming to one which during all season never took a penalty in the club.
Clive, playing fantasy football manager now, if you were in charge of the England team for the next 3 friendlies, what would you do during the England friendlies to actually prepare for penalties?
Well, these are massive. Just obviously penalty shootouts. I mean, you want to, every game's got to finish with a penalty. If you win 5-0, you finish. Ask the crowd to stay. Replicate.
To get the experience of them taking penalties.
Experiment. You can't put a price on this.
Your adventures are very much synonymous with the Virgin brand. At one stage, did you feel that you'd got yourself onto a very, very dangerous treadmill that ultimately you might pay the ultimate price?
Well, I think, the Virgin brand has a sexiness maybe that British Airways doesn't have, and part of that maybe is due to the fact that we literally push the boat out or push the balloon out or climb mountains, and that's given it an edge that our bigger competitors haven't.
Does that mean really the only way to communicate is through some big pieces of oratory? Is it critical that you need to be good in front of an audience? Dame Stella.
Well, I grew up in a service where the need to know was much more important than the need to communicate. It was all about not telling anybody anything unless they had a proven need to know it. And obviously that wasn't a very good model when you came to lead anything. And when my first leadership post, which was kind of middle management post, I was faced with this problem. How on earth was I going to know what was going on? And how was I to know what anybody else was doing? And I decided that the need to know thing had got to go out of the window.
One final question. What do you want your legacy to be?
We can all make a difference. So it's just, I've got myself into a position where, I can pick up the phone to, almost anybody in the world and get through. And that's a wonderful position to find myself in. And I'm damned if I'm going to waste it. And if somebody has some fragile ecosystem off their country, I'm going to pick up that phone and I'm going to keep bothering them until they turn it into a nature reserve and so on. So it's a lovely position to be in, and it's been great talking to you all. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, would you please put your hands together to thank Richard for a fascinating insight into affairs. Come on, Richard. Pleasure meeting you. You're welcome.